Welcome back to another episode of the Weber State Democrats podcast. I'm the president of the organization, Ethan Bishop, and this is Alex, who's the vice president. Today, we're going to be talking about different things such as the 2024 presidential election, since what is it, like I think 13 days, something like that. Before, we're just going to be talking about how we're feeling about that. I know there's a lot of, nerves are running high. Then we're going to talk about some propaganda that was spread around about Rosemary Lesser, kind of just spreading hate towards trans people. And then we're going to do a deep dive into the topic of Israel and Gaza, because that's something we haven't really talked about. And I think it's important for us to talk about foreign policy issues as well as local, state, and federal issues, because it's all within the realm of politics. And I think, a lot of the time, these things reverberate and affect each other. So it's important to talk about everything that might be important to, Weber State students. I want to ask you, Alex, how are you feeling about the presidential race? Do you think it's leaning in any direction?
I'm nervous about it because, again, I've seen so many conflicting views. Like, I just had a conversation with my stepdad about it, and we already voted differently.
Oh, yeah.
on not even the president, like just like different things. So I'm nervous, but I think like the town hall gave me some hope, I think. So yeah. I'm cautiously hopeful.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think it's important to not be too hopeful, because I think that can inspire some, I guess it can depress like your desire to actually do things to make the election go a certain way. But at the same time, like, you can't be, fanatically hopeful. Like, there was this guy and it's actually someone I want to bring onto the podcast, but at the same time, he was talking about how he thinks Kamala Harris is going to just outright win Utah, and talking about how Caroline Gleich is going to win the Senate race. And as much as I hope all of these things to happen, you can't talk about these things and be like, oh, that's definitely going to happen, or like that this isn't going to be a serious uphill climb for these candidates, especially in a state like Utah. And I think if you are overly optimistic once it comes election night, because it'll probably be called on election night, a lot of these races, unfortunately, you'll just be incredibly depressed, and I think that will make you not want to even continue fighting for a better future. So I think having more realistic expectations goes a long way in, realizing even though it's dreadful and it sucks, like, change is a very slow process. So even if we can't win all of the elections this election, we can at least look at, the margins narrowing up, or, even if it didn't, just what can we do to change this going forward, and having just that relentless attitude. That's exactly what Democrats need to have, especially in Utah. But I mean, I would say probably something similar to you, Alex. With that, I do feel nervous. I feel like there are way too many people that are supporting Trump for really no justifiable reason. I find it hard to not kind of lash out at these people who are supporting Trump, just because I'm like, why are you supporting a convicted felon and civilly adjudicated rapist who tried to overthrow our democracy and, appointed the justices that gave the president the power to be a dictator and threw away women's reproductive rights and did everything he could to destroy the environment? There's so many reasons why Donald Trump must be defeated, and there are still people who are supporting him for no reason. I mean, oh yeah, he's cool, he represents me, he speaks to the people. He's a billionaire who just put on a fucking McDonald's costume, acting like he's an ordinary worker. No, he's not. He is a billionaire who doesn't give a fuck about anyone but himself. And that's the fact of the matter, okay? And the way anyone would see that differently just makes me irritated, and I don't see how it wouldn't make anyone else irritated. It really makes absolutely no sense why he would appeal to anyone. I mean, on the surface level, I get why. I mean, people saw him as the outsider in 2016. going on. 2020, he's a president. Maybe some people, the reason why he got so many votes is because they thought, well, the economy was good before COVID, when really he just inherited Obama's economy, and the growth that was literally a continuation of the Obama economy. If you look at graphs that look at the unemployment rate and the amount of jobs created, when you look at Obama's years, it's steadily going up. Go forward to Trump, it's as if the president didn't even change. It's just consistently going up. And then COVID happened, which he horribly mismanaged, which arguably, contributed to the economic crisis from COVID, his terrible response to it. And then he lost in large part due to that on economic issues in the swing states. So then he lost, and then 2024, after the insurrection, after the overturning of Roe v. Wade via his Supreme Court justices, there are still some people who want to vote for him, and he's doing better in the polls now than he did in 2016, an election which he won, and 2020, an election where he narrowly lost. So I think it is very disturbing, and it is possible that he is going to overperform the polls just like he did in 2016 and in 2020. And if he does that, really, if he gets even close to how much he overperformed in the polls, he'll basically win in a blowout. And I wish that wasn't the case. But I mean, we also have to be realists about this. But what gives me hope, though, is that given what has happened since Trump has left office or shortly before, and just the analysis of when he was in power, when you look at the insurrection, when you look at the overturning of Roe v. Wade, in 2022, in the crucial swing states, even though the Republicans won the congressional popular vote, because it was a red wave year with a very unpopular Democratic incumbent, when you look at the crucial swing states, the polls vastly underestimated the Democrats, and almost every single race where the Republicans were projected to win, they lost by overwhelming margins even. I mean, I think with the Real Clear Politics polling average, it showed Governor Gretchen Whitmer winning Michigan by like 1 point. She ended up winning by double digits. When it comes to Mark Kelly in Arizona, he won by 5 points when it was expected to be really close, if not him losing. In Nevada, this was the closest Senate race of the cycle. Catherine Cortez Masto won by less than a percentage point, I believe it was. And everyone was certain she was going to lose, especially due to the early vote data. So that's also something to keep in mind with these early votes. And especially since it's after COVID, we don't know how many Democrats are going to vote in person rather than mail in their ballot like they did during the pandemic. So there's a good chance that in these crucial swing states, John Fetterman won by 5 points. Josh Shapiro won by, I think it was like 15 points against a literal insurrectionist. It was a guy who was there on January 6th. So, and these polls didn't really account for that. So I think it could be said that this shift in the electorate, it's also not being picked up by the 2024 polls. Maybe they're not taking into consideration the increase in registration among women, particularly women of color. Maybe they're not taking into consideration even these older, wider populations. They are shifting to the Democrats because of issues like democracy. And Never Trump Republicans, Nikki Haley voters, going towards Kamala Harris. I think there's a good chance that she could actually, win the Electoral College, as in the crucial swing states, by more than Biden did, even if, due to the national environment, Biden won by 7 million votes in 2020. Let's say she wins by, 3-4 million, if that, via the popular vote. But when it comes to the crucial swing states, she could win, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin all by 2 points or above. Wisconsin was decided by less than a percentage point in 2020. Pennsylvania and Michigan, I think it was a little, Michigan was a little over 2 points. Pennsylvania was just about 1 point. So I think Harris could absolutely overperform those margins, especially in those states. She could win Georgia potentially by more than Biden, Arizona. There's some question with the early vote data, but I still think there's a great chance she could win Georgia, especially everything that went on there with him trying to overturn the election. So it's very interesting and very scary when you look at the polls. There's some things to be optimistic about, some things not to be. We're just gonna have to see. So now I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this, and then I'll kind of chime in. Let's say that, and I'm guessing, I mean, I haven't really looked into this, but when we'll know the result. So let's just say you wake up on November 6th and enough votes have been counted to tell the victor in the 2024 presidential election. And if it is said that Donald Trump has won and defeated Kamala Harris, what do you think might be the factors and why she would have lost in that circumstance?
I think a lot of it has to do with the stuff with Gaza, because from what I've seen, a lot of the like Democrats that are hesitant to vote for her, it's because of how she's taken a stance on that whole
Yeah.
issue. So I think that would be why she would lose.
Yeah, I think that's a good point and a very plausible one because when you look at 2016, really, and I saw some analysis about this actually, shortly after, in the days actually following Election Day in 2020, they were looking at Biden's numbers and they said, well, this is Hillary Clinton's numbers plus the amount that strayed from Hillary to vote for third party candidates. So, I mean, a similar thing. I don't think that the third party candidate vote will be the same as it was in 2016. But at the same time, um, you know, there will still be a decent amount of young people and Democrats who don't want to vote for her because she was in the administration of Joe Biden, who gave money to Israel and arguably, well, I would at least would argue that they were too forthcoming and cooperative with the Israelis when they have carried out disastrous bombing campaigns that has killed. I haven't even looked at the civilian casualties. It's got to be over what 40,000. Like last I checked a few months ago. A few months ago it was like 30,000. Now I'd
way
imagine, yeah. Now I'd imagine like what 50, 60, maybe even more. I don't know, but it is just kind of ridiculous how much they do support Israel. Now, I do support Israel's right to exist, and I think it's important that Kamala does as well. But I think that is a very valid criticism now, and that's a very valid concern that will cost her the election. I hope that it doesn't, and I actually think that when it comes to Israel and Gaza, a lot of the time, sometimes the support for that and how many people care about that, I honestly think sometimes that's overinflated. When you talk to college students, like when I went to the table, no one came up and talked about Israel and Gaza. When you look at, foreign policy historically, that hasn't, outside of wars that the United States is directly involved in, such as like in 2004, we were in the middle of, a war in Afghanistan and a war in Iraq after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. That was a completely different election. Whereas now, I think, it won't be as big of an issue, but it very much could cause some young people to stay away and not vote for Kamala. But I just think that's so counterproductive because when you look at Trump, he said things like the Israelis should just finish off the people in Gaza. They need to just get it done quickly because the PR is so bad. So they just need to, kill all of the civilians who honestly did nothing wrong, many of them. And all the animals that live there just completely topple the entire, population and the entire landmass of Gaza. I honestly don't think Trump would care if Netanyahu dropped a nuke on Gaza. Like, he really would not care. He only cares about himself. He doesn't even care about the American people who died by the hundreds of thousands from COVID. Why do you think he would care about people in Gaza? And I think that these leftists, they know that he doesn't. They just think maybe, if we can thwart, it was Biden, now it's Kamala, maybe then the Democratic Party will recalibrate and put up someone who actually is more pro Gaza. But it's like, who's to say we'll have another election because he's so anti-democratic. And after the Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, he really could just send in the military. And he's recently threatened to do this, send in the military against his political opponents. He could use the Department of Justice, which the Supreme Court very explicitly said is under the president's domain. He can never be charged with a crime based on what he does with the Department of Justice, which part of Project 2025 is direct control of the executive branch's agencies. So he will directly control the Department of Justice to, I guess, take away ballot boxes, stop votes from being counted if it's his successor, or I wouldn't put it past him to run for a third term, even though it's unconstitutional, and basically execute a coup like he tried to do in 2020, or 2021 and 2020. So yeah, I mean, it just makes absolutely no sense. Have you talked to anyone who might be in your life or online who has said that they're not going to vote for Kamala?
because of Gaza.
Uh-huh. And what were those conversations like?
A lot of them are just like I don't entirely understand it because like again like you said Trump is also like totally fine with the civilians being
Yeah, he
murdered.
does not care.
But I think Harris has actually like called for a ceasefire. So at the very least something would come from that. With Trump nothing would.
Yeah.
Like more people would just keep dying. But like I've seen a lot of them say they're gonna vote like third party, which you can't do this close to an election.
Yeah. Or in this election specifically.
Yeah. So it's just been a disaster, really.
Yeah. I mean, do you know what they would say to any of these critiques, or are they just kind of burying their head in the sand and they don't want to hear it?
I don't really know because I don't think a lot of them don't like Israel at all, and don't think it has a right to exist, which I do think it has a right to exist. But there needs to be a ceasefire.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so I hope those people, maybe some of them could be watching this, or, just, talking to your friends and family. If they're saying this, just kind of point out, hey, I don't think the Biden administration wouldn't be perfect on this, but, Harris is a completely different person. Her administration could take a different stance, and I think she's signaled she will. She'll take a more sympathetic approach to the Gazan civilians while still calling out Hamas for being a radical terrorist organization. So I think that it's important to recognize that and to say that she would be far better than Trump. And then as well as the domestic policy of destroying the environment, reproductive rights, most importantly, taking away our democracy, and then we can't do anything, and anything for the people of Gaza, because a big part of democracy is even free speech. So if you want to talk about how much you hate Israel and you want to, free the civilians of Gaza from their chains, basically, it's like, well, in a far right, theocratic, fascist, state-run America, it's just you won't be able to do that, basically. So now I kind of want to move on to, let's say you wake up on the morning of November 6th, and after enough ballots have been counted, it is said that Kamala Harris has defeated Donald Trump. Why do you think he lost, and what do you think were maybe some of the factors that contributed to that?
he is not a good person, and he has very skewed political beliefs, and he also wants to be a dictator, I think. And also, like, all the Nazi stuff he said, that has put a lot of Republicans against him. And then, like, obviously, like, Mike Pence, other people on his staff, like, have, like, been like, don't vote for him.
Yeah.
And then just, like, I think more people are going out to vote. I'm doing so bad right now. I don't know what's happening.
No, you're doing
But
great.
more people are going out to vote because this election is so much more important than I feel most people have thought the other elections to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people are just realizing like how many rights they would lose and
Yeah.
what would happen if Trump were to have another term.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, and I think especially after January 6th, and then so January 6th, I think marked an event in which many Americans looked at that and their idea of what patriotism is and what party represents patriotism and the American ideal. I think that it took a shift. So I think many people are now saying country over party, even if they're a Republican or they were an independent, or maybe even they were a further left Democrat or a more conservative Democrat. They say it is so important to protect our democracy and our American founding ideals of self-governance and fighting back against tyrannical government, which was then further cemented by the Dobbs decision, which unleashed all these horrible abortion bans, causing 13-year-old girls to birth their rapist children, or even these laws with exceptions for the health or even life of the mother. Doctors have to wait until they're on death's door before providing care, or even then, a lot of them are leaving the state. So then women don't even have access to it. Even if there would be a doctor that would be willing to do it, they won't be there, such as in Idaho. The only reason we're not seeing that much in Utah is because the laws have been put on hold by the courts. And we'll see in the next legislative session, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, the Utah Republicans, they'll just come after the courts and try to have absolute power, which they've already kind of been doing. So yeah, I think that perfectly sums up why Trump would lose. He's just a terrible person too. Just so many flaws about him. Like I said, he was found liable for raping E. Jean Carroll, and then defaming her for it. There are, what is it? I think it was like 15 other credible allegations of sexual assault from him, including a 13-year-old girl who said that him and Jeffrey Epstein raped her. He was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. There's all these conspiracy theories about the whole cabal and oh yeah, Jeffrey Epstein, and it's in Bill Clinton. And they think it's so intriguing that Bill Clinton had a close relationship with Epstein. And I think Clinton actually did go to Epstein Island to their point. But Trump, he also flew on Epstein's jets. I believe it was 7 times from the flight logs that I think was released either earlier this year or in 2023. And he was best friends with him, right? And with all the other sexual assault allegations, it's only, who's to say, what would have happened. And he also brought his children around Jeffrey Epstein. Trump did. So I think that's also important to note. So now we're going to, talk about this kind of piece of propaganda that's been spread around about our great state representative, Rosemary Lesser. It's tilted, but I'm rocking the pin from her campaign. We did a table today. We talked to many students, and we had some great conversations. I think everyone there was really, that we talked to, if they weren't on board already, they became on board. I think there was one kind of wacky, I guess she said she was a delegate for the Republicans, but she was nice, but she was saying that it was a good thing to be cozying up to Vladimir Putin and Russia and these kind of things. And I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of extreme. You want some murderous dictator who literally, whose troops, deploys sexual violence and culture erasure on the Ukrainians. It's like you want, the president to be close to him. It's like, and who steals elections, which Trump wants to do. So, it makes sense. But there's this propaganda floating around about Rosemary Lesser, who represents House District 10. If you live in or around Weber State University, you'll be able to vote for her, or in Ogden and that kind of thing. So, and I guess I'll put the image on the screen. I try to keep the editing to a minimum, but this is important. It says, protecting women's sport. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. It's a common sense issue. And then it says, Democrat Rep. Rosemary Lesser voted against Utah's girls, voted to allow males to use girls' locker rooms, voted to allow males to play girls' sports, voted to allow irreversible transgender surgeries for minors. Vote against Rosemary Lesser on November 5th. And I think this is paid for by the Preserving Utah Values PAC. It's just ridiculous how they claim to be preserving values. Yeah, you're preserving bigotry and hate. So first of all, we're going to talk about how their first claim was she voted to allow males to use girls' locker rooms. So this was against like the bathroom bill, which was kind of far-ranging, not just with bathrooms, but also locker rooms and different things like that. Like, they say that if you are assigned the sex of male at birth, then it's illegal for you to then go into the bathroom that corresponds to your preferred gender identity. Um, so this claim, it very much misrepresents gender inclusive policies. Many organizations such as the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Medical Association support affirming a person's gender identity as essential to mental health, and access to facilities based on gender identity is intended to ensure safety and dignity for trans youth. And again, research shows that forcing trans individuals to use facilities inconsistent with their identity leads to increased mental health risks like anxiety, depression, which can lead to suicide. And if you're concerned about sexual assault, or in one of the papers said ogling women, this behavior is not exclusive to trans girls, okay? If you're concerned about sexual assaults happening in locker rooms or bathrooms, that happening wouldn't be happening because someone is transgender. There's nothing inherently about being transgender that would make you want to assault women. And also, I mean, being assigned the sex of male at birth, that also doesn't make it so you have some predisposition to assault women, okay? The decision to basically sexually assault someone, that is a very depraved desire that is being acted upon by someone who is unhinged and shouldn't be around general members of society if they can't control their impulses. That has nothing to do with just someone being trans, and not letting them use these bathrooms. That's just going to lead to people who are trans, who you would think is a cisgendered person, walking into other bathrooms that cis straight people. They'll look at them and they'll say, why are you in this bathroom? You're a man, why are you in the girls bathroom? And that can lead to hate crimes and that sort of thing. So it'll do the absolute opposite, because I think it's very important to recognize, trans girls are girls, trans boys are boys. And when you are having these policies forcing them to go into different bathrooms, you are doing the exact opposite of what you claimed you are doing, which is trying to prevent boys from going into girls' bathrooms and girls from going into boys' bathrooms. It's absolutely ridiculous. And yeah, sexual assault, that's already illegal. So when you think, oh, we're going to criminalize them going into this bathroom, it's like, well, you think that that's going to stop them from sexually assaulting someone when sexual assault is already illegal? So you think that this law, which I'd assume would carry a much smaller penalty than actually sexually assaulting people, you think that will prevent someone from going into a bathroom to sexually assault someone if that was their intention all along? It makes absolutely no sense.
Trans people going into the wrong bathroom is gonna it increases, because trans people get sexually assaulted because just cis people, transphobic cis people, obviously, but say I went into the women's bathroom, I could get sexually assaulted because they'd be like, what the hell? And they just do that. And then I know it's happened to trans women using the men's restroom because they're women, and it's just a whole disaster. And also, recently, I think it was a couple months ago, that one, they were non-binary, got beat to death or something.
Yeah.
In the bathroom.
Yeah. I remember that now, actually. That was a horrific case where, yeah, I think they went into the wrong bathroom, and then they got beat up, and then they later died from the trauma they had endured from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point on the sexual assault. I mean, I mostly would think that if a trans male would have walked into a girl's bathroom, then maybe one of the cis girls in there would go tell their dad or their boyfriend or something, and they could potentially tell their friends, or just go assault them themselves, and they could get beaten to death just because they're like, why is there a guy in the girls' bathroom, when in reality they were just trying to follow the law, basically. So it makes it an impossible choice. Either face, legal repercussions, because this is illegal. That's what the legislature did, and that's what you're supporting if you support measures like this, or, risk getting beaten to death or sexually assaulted, as you know. So then, the other claim is voted to allow males to play girl sports, and this one is even more ridiculous. So the claim, it inaccurately portrays participation policies again, these medical organizations, they support, trans people participating in the sports aligned with their gender identity for the same, mental health reasons. And there is no evidence that these gender affirming policies necessarily lead to unfair competitive advantages. And multiple sports organizations, such as the National Collegiate, however you say that, Athletic Association, they have frameworks to address these issues and to make it fair, such as sometimes they have rules for specific sports, and this is oftentimes deferred to just what the nature of the specific sport, and how much testosterone can be present in a trans girl's body, for example, in order for them to participate in a sport against cisgendered women. There are various, factors to make it fair, having testosterone and that kind of thing, and having a different build, being stronger and that sort of thing, which I guess some people would say is contributed to by them being assigned, a male at birth. But these are not advantages inherent to trans girls, for example. I mean, when you look at other competitors, there could be a girl, for example, let's say they're playing soccer, and there's this big bodybuilder girl in this on this team, and then on the other team you have no one who has the same physique. It's like, you could say that's unfair. Are you going to ban these bodybuilder women from participating in girls soccer? It's like, no. Are you going to say, oh well, this is preventing girls from getting scholarships and that sort of thing? No. You're either going to let them play, or if it's that big of an issue, you can match it to be more fair, but it wouldn't be based on whether you're trans or not. That is just pigeonholing and having this arbitrary standard of who can participate in which team, purely because of bigotry. If the problem is strength, if the problem is endurance, if the problem is, all these things which you think is being caused by testosterone, you can match it based on these actual attributes, not just because someone is trans, okay? That makes absolutely no sense. Why would you want the government to be involved in this? There are, I guess, technically governing bodies of these specific sports, as I say, which will actually come up with more common sense rules to make sure everything is fair. Why do you want the government rearing their head into this? Just like how they want the government rearing their head on what you can do in your bedroom with restricting access to contraception, or gay marriage, as Clarence Thomas said, should be revisited. Literally in the Dobbs decision, these conservative Republicans are saying, we want to run back the clock on these rights. We want the government to be involved. They are the party of tyrannical government, and this is just another example of it. So, did you have any thoughts on kind of the whole trans sports things?
So first of all, like, hormone replacement therapy, like, actually changes, like, how you gain muscle and all that, and, like, your endurance and stuff. So, like, if a trans girl is on estrogen, then she's going to be at about the same, like, physical attributes as a cis girl is. Mm-hmm. Same thing with, like, trans men. But also, that being said, for most of these sports, they're talking about children.
Yeah.
And those children, like, children just have similar body types and endurance and, like, all that, and, like, muscle gain.
Yeah.
Just because they're kids.
Yeah.
Like, the ages they're talking about, like junior high and stuff, there's not enough differences for it to make a difference. Yeah. So it doesn't really matter. Like, it's just them being discriminatory, and it's stupid.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's a good point. Like, when you look at, like, for example, in PE class, that isn't always separated even by gender. Like, they'll just have, well, they had two teams. This is actually a little bit embarrassing on my part, but they would have two teams, one for, like, people or the kids who weren't that serious about it and they wanted to be on, like, the nice team or whatever, and then you have, like, the team where it's, like, more like, I guess, the jock-ish. I mean, they're too young to be actual jocks, but they are more, like, sporty and competitive, and I would always go on the former team, and just because I was never really into all the sports and PE and that kind of thing. So I would join the other team and it would be easier and just do that. But I mean, the other team, yeah, there were boys and girls on that. It never really seemed to make a difference in who was winning in that sort of thing. But like we're saying, even if it did, like there are ways to make it fair. There's nothing inherent about being trans, and that's also a good point with young, children and that sort of thing. They haven't even hit puberty yet, so these sort of defining features, which come around the age where boys and girls they are actually start being capable of reproducing through puberty and that sort of thing, and they start getting these hormones and testosterone and estrogen and these sort of things. Before that, or even just barely starting to get into that, there's not enough of a difference. So I think that's a good point as well. And I mean, so the last thing on this stupid, I guess, meme, I would call it, is they say that because she voted against a bill that would have prohibited gender-affirming care for minors, that she's for allowing irreversible transgender surgeries for minors. Now, the fact is, the Endocrine Society and the American Medical Association guidelines confirm that irreversible surgeries for minors are exceedingly rare and only considered in severe cases of gender dysphoria after extensive medical evaluation. Less invasive treatments such as puberty blockers and hormone therapy are prioritized as the standard of care. Medical malpractice laws already prevent doctors from performing any surgery without a thorough evaluation and proper medical justification. So when you look at this, it's like, oh, you're there. She voted to allow irreversible transgender surgeries for minors. It's already illegal to just give a minor just, oh, I'm gonna chop off your appendage because you came in and you said you feel like a girl. It's like, that's not happening. They always go through, and this is, the accepted standard of care, which are, outlined by organizations such as the American Medical Association and these huge associations of 30,000, 60,000, 70,000 physicians all in one association that come together and come up with standards in order to, provide the most effective care and to prevent things like suicide. So when you're looking at any minor in a rare case who would get gender affirming actual surgery, irreversible surgery at that almost always comes after they've tried other things. Such as puberty blockers, which are reversible. When people say, oh, puberty blockers, oh, that's so disgusting and that sort of thing. If someone has gender dysphoria, which, by the way, that is a psychological condition, so it doesn't characterize you being trans because gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is the discomfort you feel because your preferred gender doesn't match up with the sex you were assigned at birth. So it's literally characterized by your discomfort with that. And the most effective treatment, which all these leading medical organizations say, is gender affirming care, either going by a different name or puberty blockers, hormone therapy. I believe those two are almost completely reversible. And then when you look at, the surgeries, it's funny because I think they contribute to the problem that they're talking about, because they're saying, oh, it's so terrible that these, children could get, surgeries. Well, why do you think that their gender dysphoria gets so bad that the medical professionals then say, oh, well, we're going to have to do this surgery because this is what's going to prevent them from literally killing themselves? Why do you think it gets that bad? Well, a contributing factor is people who make memes like this saying, oh, yeah, you shouldn't be able to do this. You are a male. They literally say allow males to do it. They don't even put quotation marks. They don't say anything. They are literally calling trans girls males. And then you wonder why their gender dysphoria gets so bad to the point where they feel like in order to, feel like themselves, feel like an authentic individual, which they want to live as, they have to do irreversible surgery. So you contributed to the desire for them to do that. Now, even if it wasn't that, when you look at it, in severe cases of gender dysphoria, which is really the only time in which irreversible surgeries take place, that's, being against that is like being against, for example, I had necrotizing fasciitis in 2021. I could stand up right now and show you the skin graft where there was a gaping wound in my groin because it had infected tissue that they had to cut out or else it could have spread. And this might be kind of, disgusting for some people, but it literally could have spread to my genitals and I would have had to get those cut off, basically. And that's happened to people who's had necrotizing fasciitis. It is an extremely deadly disease and invasive disease. And in many ways, just like gender dysphoria for a different reason. So instead of it being a mental condition where you need invasive surgery to prevent that from killing you, gender dysphoria is the same thing. If you need invasive surgery to prevent that from happening, that's justified. Just like how it's justified to cut into my groin and remove that, and it caused irreversible damage in that I'm going to have this skin graft my entire life. It's never going to look or feel exactly the same as my normal skin. The same could be said about that. So would you rather a minor have irreversible surgery or a minor be dead from suicide? It's like, you got to pick a side. And if you're on the side of literal kids committing suicide, I don't think you're winning on the issue. And I think that's very much on the wrong side of history. No one who has ever been so discriminatory and bigoted against, especially a tiny fraction of the Utah population, or the population in general, they never go down on the right side of history. So, yeah.
This topic pisses me off so bad because it just shows how little people understand about our medical system. Because surgery's not just happening. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, I'm going through this process right now. You need to be in therapy for like at least like a month or something, and then you need to get a letter from your therapist saying that you're in the correct mental state, and that takes a couple weeks for them to write, and then you have to like fax the letter to the surgeon and they have to like review it, and then you schedule the thing, and they're so booked that it's like years out. Like mine was at least 6 months out, and I still haven't reached it yet. So that irritates me because it's just not happening, and I'm not a minor. So obviously it's taking like way longer for minors. And then for the puberty blocker thing, cis people take puberty blockers all the time because like when cis kids go through early puberty, that causes a lot of negative mental health effects. So they have to take puberty blockers. It's just healthcare. Mm-hmm. And I don't know.
Yeah. I think those are all great points. I probably should have had you say that first.
No.
Now we're going to be talking about Israel-Gaza, as I said. Obviously, on October 7th, Hamas, they launched a terrible attack on Israel, into southern Israel. They killed over 1,400 people. They engaged in sexual violence, which some people unfortunately want to dispute, whereas a special UN envoy report said that there was evidence that women were being sexually violated, if not by Hamas themselves, then by people who came across the border after Hamas destroyed the barrier separating Israel and Gaza. So this attack was obviously followed by swift Israeli response, including heavy airstrikes on Gaza, causing significant destruction and loss of civilian lives. Gaza humanitarian crisis and international aid efforts. The situation in Gaza deteriorated rapidly as Israeli airstrikes targeted infrastructure, leading to severe shortages of water, electricity, and medical supplies. Israel imposed a full blockade on the region, worsening the humanitarian crisis. In response, the U.S. urged Israel to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza, and international aid organizations started calling for a ceasefire to prevent further civilian casualties. Iran and Lebanon's role, which I figured I'd include because they are involved in this ongoing crisis. Iran and Hezbollah, which is basically just an organization like Hamas, except in Lebanon, they support Hamas. Recently, Hezbollah has intensified cross-border skirmishes with Israel, raising concerns about a potential second front in the conflict. Tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border are high, with both sides engaging in artillery exchanges. On October 1st, 2024, so just earlier this month, Iran launched approximately 200 ballistic missiles targeting Israeli sites, marking the largest direct attack between the two nations. This strike was claimed as retaliation for Israel's assassinations of key figures linked to Hamas and Hezbollah. While Israel reported intercepting most missiles, some caused damage to military installations and civilian areas. Iran framed this attack as self-defense amidst ongoing tensions in the region, and Netanyahu has vowed to strike back, stoking fears about a larger war in the Middle East. So the U.S. has deployed military assets, including aircraft carriers, to the eastern Mediterranean to deter further regional escalation. President Biden has publicly supported Israel's right to defend itself, while also calling for restraint to protect civilians. The U.S. is working diplomatically to prevent the conflict from spreading, particularly with regard to Iran and Hezbollah. So, broader political impact. The conflict has complicated U.S. relations in the region, especially as it coincides with ongoing efforts to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Additionally, American officials have expressed concern about escalating settler violence in the West Bank, which risks further inflaming tensions. These developments reflect the broader geopolitical dynamics at play, with multiple actors involved, from Hamas and Israel to the U.S., Iran, and regional proxies like Hezbollah. The conflict remains fluid, with international leaders pushing for de-escalation while also addressing the complex humanitarian and political dimensions. So I think with all of that, it is a very complex and honestly scary scenario we're dealing with here in the Middle East. And I think that there isn't a clear answer one way or the other what the right response is in this for America. I mean, I think that there are a few things that are probably that we can establish, such as, Israel has a right to exist. The Palestinian civilians, they have the right to exist as well. I think Palestine as an entity, as being separate from Israel, has a right to exist. So therefore, a two-state solution is imperative. When it comes to Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, I think we should take a very, hawkish approach to them. Not to say that the civilians in which they govern should be killed or anything like that, but it's just that these regimes are basically extreme Islamic, just terrorist organizations, basically. Even Iran, I mean, they enrich uranium, and they want to, develop their nuclear capacity, and it's very dangerous, what they're doing with attacking Israel, because of things Israel has done, which goes against literal terrorist organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas. So they very much support Hamas and Hezbollah. It's not any, debate now. They definitely do. So I think it should be said that Hamas should never be able to govern the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, they were elected by the Palestinian people in the 2006 elections, after Israel basically gave the Gaza Strip independence in 2005. When they elected Hamas, they basically took all of the money that were flooding in from foreign entities and different countries to try to help them, build this new country. And they took that and they basically dug tunnels, and they, stockpiled weapons, and they oppressed their own people, didn't provide proper health care, food assistance, any sort of semblance of well-being to their own people. They use them as human shields, which is why they stashed their own, what would be military targets amidst schools and hospitals and other, places where civilians will gather to try to deter Israel from trying to kill them after a terrorist attack like October 7th. So I just think that it's very important for Hamas to be eradicated, and for there to be some other government that really does reflect the Palestinian people, but reflects a sentiment that isn't, we're going to kill all Israelis, we want to kill all Americans, we want or for example, there's this conflict in the Muslim world between the Sunnis and the Shias, and Hamas, they align with the Sunnis. And I think that also is something to address. They also are very anti-LGBTQ rights, and none of and women's rights. And none of this is to say that this is unique to the Muslim world. I think this is true for the separation of church and state in any country. And I mean, we're seeing the detrimental impacts of that in America with the right wing, with the extreme abortion bans due to the separation of church and state, as just one example. And this whole rejection of science, as they might believe some things that are in the Bible that are scientifically untrue, such as that evolution didn't happen, and that the Earth is 6,000 years old, and different things like that. It's very negative to have, especially, I think, any kind of religion to kind of have this incestuous relationship with government that I think causes who are technically conservatives in the Muslim world with people like Hamas, and then, the far right extremists in the United States, they just need to not be in power. And with Hamas in specifically with, going into Israel, doing airstrikes, raping women, taking hostages. It's just they need to be eradicated. And that's not to say that the Palestinian people will be fine with this. Many of them probably support Hamas, which in some ways you could say is reasonable because of everything that's happened with Israel. A lot of the stuff Israel has done is very unfair and frankly against international law, which even the United States has recognized, such as the settlements in the West Bank, and different things, and the just over the top bombing, which is an expression Biden used to describe their bombing campaign. It's just we need to find some sort of solution where someone can negotiate on behalf of the Palestinians that isn't Hamas, who actually is popular, or at least can salvage their popularity among the Gazans. And I think only then we can maybe have a two-state solution, and then you won't have, but it's also, and I'm sorry to keep talking, but it complicates relations, because I mean, if you take out Hamas, Iran and Hezbollah are with Hamas. So, and then if you want to go into Lebanon and take out Hezbollah, well, then Iran is still there. So what, are you just going to fight all of these entities and kill all of them and then just be fine by your own, or colonize them? Because if not, after being bombed, they will probably want to elect similar people in their place. It's like, it's just a very complex situation. But I think a good first step would be, honestly, eradicating Hamas. I think that'll some of the tension will be deflated from the region. So yeah. And if you have any thoughts on that.
I wanted to touch on some of the stuff you said. So first of all, the whole because the whole what was it? Them electing Hamas. I would like to say that's kind of like comparing America to voting for Donald Trump, because not all Palestinians were like, yes, Hamas. Just like not all Americans are pro Donald Trump. I would just like to say that. And then also, I want to add that obviously Hamas is a terrorist organization. I don't think, this is my personal opinion, I don't think this conflict has been about Hamas for kind of a long time now, because they've been bombing places like hospitals and stuff. Like, I do believe they are committing a genocide, just like we did on the Native Americans all those years ago with like Christopher Columbus and all that. I do think like a lot of it is about Hamas, but I do think also a lot of it is just them committing genocide.
Yeah. And I mean, I would honestly agree with that. I mean, I think that when you look at that they elected Hamas, I do actually think that's very comparable to Americans electing Donald Trump. And I think that Americans do have some culpability for electing him.
Yes.
Just like how the Gazans who elected Hamas, they have some culpability as well.
But also not all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not all of them. And I definitely think that some of the airstrikes and that sort of thing, or I don't even know if you'd call it airstrikes, just like 1,000-pound bombs or 2,000-pound bombs, whatever it is, just eviscerating so many civilians.
Hospitals and schools as well.
Yeah,
Like,
and some of the times, to their credit, some of the times, it is true Hamas does use these places as human shield at times,
yes.
so that to try to deter Israel from doing that. That being said, there are some times where I think it was the biggest refugee camp in Gaza, and there was, I think it was like just a singular number of Hamas officials. There wasn't it wasn't the leader of Hamas, who I think recently got killed. There wasn't a ton of Hamas soldiers there. There was literally like in single digits amount of Hamas officials,
But like,
and they bombed the entire
yeah,
thing.
like a lot of
Yeah.
like civilians
Yeah.
that don't support Hamas, essentially.
And that's ridiculous. And I think and there's also been a lot of, veterans from the United States and that who think of a strategy which would be way more coordinated, where you just do particular airstrikes to basically cut the head off of Hamas and try to, reinstate a different kind of government. And I think that would be the only way in which you could do it, because if you are bombing so many civilians, it's like that then encourages them to elect someone like Hamas in their place, because they're going to be so hate fueled. And granted, they might already be, just because of all the grievances, but at the same time, I don't think you're making it any better by bombing these places. And then the civilians, they're just going to want someone like Hamas, who will then kill Israel and Israeli civilians, because they said, hey, that's what the Israeli government did to us. So they want, and they would be complicit in that, because it just continues the cycle of revenge. And I really do think that when it comes to that, it needs to be a situation where the Israelis need to convince the Gazan people by some way that Hamas is not in their best interest. And in many ways, the reason why it's not the entire reason, but I think in many ways that spurred it, because they weren't doing this crazy bombing campaign before October 7th. I think in some ways they used October 7th as a pretext. But the fact is, if Hamas didn't do that, they wouldn't have had that pretext. They wouldn't have had any legs to stand on. You wouldn't have people like, you and me saying Israel. I mean, honestly, if October 7th didn't happen and they were just randomly bombing, Gaza and that sort of thing, I would say no, they don't have the right to exist, because
Yeah.
that's like saying, I don't think Russia has a right to exist. And that might be controversial, but I think honestly it's kind of extreme to say they do. After, they want to disregard sovereignty and commit sexual violence and cultural erasure and bomb children's and maternities hospitals. In Ukraine, it's like they don't have the right to exist, just like how I don't think Hamas has the right to exist. Now, Israel, I don't think they're as inherently extreme or as inherently indiscriminate as, for example, like Hamas or like Vladimir Putin in Russia. So for that reason, I really just do think that there needs to be some way of convincing the Palestinian people that Hamas is in large part, they spurred all of these bombings by their attack. So they should be blamed by the Palestinian people, and they should not be popular among them, which unfortunately I believe in many ways they are, just because of all the grievances throughout the years. So that definitely needs to happen. It's definitely easier said than done to do that. But I think that has to be the situation we're going towards. And I don't even think Netanyahu is supportive of a two-state solution. So that can never really happen with him in power. And again, I think he's using the war as a pretext, for example, to not have elections in Israel, because I think he knows his political career is going to be dead by then. With October 7th, some of it is Netanyahu's to blame for not, taking the security measures that he could have. And I think there was some reporting on that, even, closer to the actual attack, how, much like with George Bush in 9/11, there were some other things he could have done to prevent that from happening. Same goes with Netanyahu in October 7th. It was incompetence. So I think there needs to be new Israeli government. Basically needs to be regime change in Gaza, and the first step to that is to stop just mercilessly bombing civilians and actually bring the Palestinian civilians to the table, and maybe have them rally around a leader who isn't aligned with Hamas.
Can I say something that's kind of off topic, but sort of
Yeah.
on topic? Okay. I saw a video of like an Israeli soldier like in line for like the store, and she was upset that there was like no gluten-free bread.
Uh-huh.
And then, but I've also seen like videos of Palestinians like lining up for like a day just to get water, just to be turned away because they ran out of water.
Hmm.
So like, I think, like, obviously I don't want Israelis to be hurt, but I do think it's important to note that Palestinians, all of them, like the civilians, are being harmed more than the Israelis. I don't know. That's not a good way to word what I'm trying to say. But like, do you understand what I'm trying
Yeah.
to say? Okay.
I think that is true. I mean, on the one hand, like when you look at it, the only sort of pushback I would ever have on it being called a genocide, in effect and in how we think of a genocide, yes, it is. But at the same time, I think here's the difference between Israel and Hamas and why I'm actually technically more pro-Israel, just because I do think Israel has the right to exist and Hamas doesn't, is if Israel wanted to completely eradicate Gaza off the face of the earth, they could literally do it. Like they have the resources to completely wipe Gaza off the face of the earth.
I
Now,
feel like they kind of are doing that though.
well, I mean, they could,
Slower.
yeah, they could have just done it in one fell swoop.
That's true.
Whereas Hamas, I think if Hamas had the ability, they would instantly do it. And I think that the only reason they haven't is because they don't have the capabilities of doing that. But they are dead set on killing Israel. In many ways, this spans back to like religious conflict. I mean, when you look at some videos from October 7th that are just burned into my mind, like they didn't only want to kill civilians, they wanted to humiliate them. Like there were some reports of women's corpses being raped and corpses just being brought back to the Gaza Strip. They literally put the corpses in the trucks and brought some of them back for what God knows what reason. But yeah, I mean, I think that, and I think they even said this in their charter, how Hamas, their express goal is to eradicate Israel, and that is their goal. Whereas Israel, I think there is something to be said that many officials, they do want to eradicate Gaza and that sort of thing. I think it could be said that Netanyahu does as well. I think Israel as a whole, they're not taking that step yet of completely eradicating them because they know it's not in their best interest as far as foreign policy goes.
Yeah.
As far as America would be on their ass because they're like, you are totally inflaming tensions for no reason. There was no need to just destroy this entire separate place. So yeah, I mean, I would say that's the difference. And I mean, what I said earlier about Russia, I mean, it's not potentially like I don't think Russia could ever have a good government that doesn't do things like what they're doing to Ukraine. It's just the corruption runs so much deeper in Russia than Israel that like it makes more sense to say Israel has a right to exist than Russia does. All right, so I think that was a great episode. If you want to join the WSU Dems, make sure to follow us on Instagram. So if you do go to Weber State, I mean, you can just go to eWeber, go to clubs, scroll down to the College Democrats at Weber State University. So it's in the C section. And you can just register there if you need help. I mean, we have a post on our Instagram which will help you do so. If you want to watch more videos, I'll link one right here, and you can click on that. So yeah, have a nice day or night, everybody.